Listen!
Welcome everyone, this is AndresRestart. I am joined by my friend Nate from Nintendo Prime, and today we're going to be having a little debate. Now, before I even say what it is, right, this is a friendly debate, right? This is our opinions, it is subjective. We both love Nintendo, we both love Metroid Prime, but we have a little bit of a disagreement. You may have saw it on Twitter. And basically, we just have a slightly different perspective on the graphics in Metroid Prime Remastered. I contend that Metroid Prime Remastered is truly one of the best looking, most impressive games on Switch. When I play this game, I think, man, is this really possible on Switch? They really were able to do this. This is an incredible achievement. So I'm going to argue that this is a top 5 most impressive, best looking game on Switch. Nate, on the other hand, feels a little differently. So, how do you feel about the graphics in Metroid Prime Remastered?
They're good.
Okay.
Never stated otherwise. I mean, right off the bat, just to clarify, I think this is a really good remaster, and I'm having a lot of fun playing it. There's some old gameplay gimmicks I wish would be improved, but those improved in 2 and 3, so they mostly wanted to keep the gameplay intact. So we're not here to talk about that. Yeah, they're good. I just think they're good. There's nothing about the game that makes me go, like you said, how did they get this to run on Switch? And I go, it's actually pretty easy how they got this to run on Switch. It's not that impressive. So that's
what makes
kind of
what makes you say that though, right? What makes you feel that it's not that impressive, right? So I take it you don't think this is a top 5 best looking game on Switch?
No.
Okay. So what about
Pushing
it?
Top 10, maybe at 10.
Okay.
Maybe it's gonna be subjective based on art styles and preferences and stuff.
Sure. I mean, there's definitely a lot of flexibility there, and we'll get to some game examples and comparisons in a minute. But when you look at Metroid Prime Remastered, what is it about it that you say, oh, this was easy to do for them?
Well, one, it's just to go back and watch Metroid Prime on GameCube and look at graphics comparison. The game still looks good today. Just up-resing the normal textures to 1080p in an emulator still looks really good. Now, not as good as this. To their credit, that's not just what they did. They could have just did that, made it widescreen, added in the dual stick controls, and called it a day. People have been doing that on emulators forever, and it kind of sounds like that might just be what they're doing with 2 and 3, although 2 and 3 obviously were made later, so maybe they didn't need as much of this kind of work to be impressive, especially 3. Wouldn't probably need as much work.
I'll give you this, right? Because I've played the original a bit recently. I mean, I've played the original several times, and I've beaten the game dozens of times. I've actually already beaten the game, the new one, a few times already too. So I've played it a lot, and I'll tell you that I even looked at the original earlier today in preparation for this little discussion. Right? It was like I took another look at it, you know, and I played both, and it was like, okay, just kind of had to have both versions fresh in my mind. And I will say that playing through the original, that thought crossed my mind. Boy, if they had just done like a clean 1080p upscale, cleaned up all the textures, and put it on Switch and widescreen, it would have still looked pretty good. I do agree with you on that. But pretty good wouldn't be in contention for one of the best looking games on Switch. It would have just been mid-range at best. At best. Prime Remastered is so impressive to me that not only do I think it's one of the best looking games on Switch, it gives me full confidence that Prime 4, even if it is only on Switch, will be extremely impressive. Like, it is any concerns I had about maybe performance or anything like that, Prime Remastered has eased all those concerns.
So there's a couple things. First off, I think you and I had very different expectations going into this game. You probably didn't expect it to look as good as it did. I kind of expected it to be a bit better. And I have reasonings for this. One, because of all the other impossible ports we've seen on Switch that are using, in my opinion, way more impressive visuals. Two, the fact that Metroid Prime's a very enclosed game. It's very, you're in a section. Even when you're in like an open part on the planet, it's really not that big. It's a very small set. Especially, obviously, I don't want to compare it necessarily directly to open worlds, but It's very small, and that's why I go, oh, well, yeah, it should look at least this good because this isn't actually that hard to do. This looked really damn good back on GameCube. There's a reason it could look as good as it did back on GameCube. Hardware that was significantly worse, because it's not that hard to make things look good when it's really heavily enclosed like this, and you don't have sections like in Doom Eternal where you're being attacked by 70 million different types of demons all at once. That's not really the way Metroid Prime works, which is fine, by the way. That's not a knock on Metroid Prime. That's just like there isn't that much happening. And like the other thing was things I wanted to see them improve on, they also didn't, which affected some of my visual enjoyment of the game.
Like what?
Just as a brief example, and this is really early in the game. I'm not that far. I'm only like 3 hours in, which I guess the Metroid Prime is pretty decently far, but the way I'm playing it anyways, I'm just kind of slamming through.
Have you beaten Flagra yet?
Yes.
Okay. Have you beaten Thardis yet?
No.
Okay. That's how I sort of measure like Flagra, Thardis, Omega Pirate, Ridley, you know, like it's kind of like almost like 4 quarters.
So like there's this part early in the game, you know, when you leave the station after it blows up before you go to the planet, and it has Ridley, and he flies off.
Okay.
The thing is, his animation for a moment, not only does it look like it skips and doesn't even feel like it's running at 30 FPS, let alone 60, I thought I was seeing something, and the shadow was really weird, and I didn't get it. And then I went back and I watched Metroid Prime, and I'm like, it's exactly how we did in Metroid Prime. It looked like he skipped, but we didn't think about it at the time because we didn't care and it was blurrier. But it's actually the exact same animation, which, by the way, animations aren't visuals, but it can affect the visual quality when you feel like you're having this smooth experience, and all of a sudden, why is Ridley like that? This isn't even that complicated of a scene. He's standing up there, he's flying off. What's the big deal? Why does this feel weird? Like even when the
I just want to get clarity. Is it?
Yeah.
So it's not the scene where Samus runs into Ridley inside the ship. It's when he's flying outside the ship.
It's both. I would say it's both.
Okay.
And that's just an early example.
Okay. I'm gonna have to take because I'm not sure what you're referring to. I'll have to take a look.
It's a very minor thing. Which
hopefully in post I'll put something in to kind of show an example.
Sure.
I will tell you this. I think that one, you're right. The animations are largely unchanged. I mean, it is at the end of the day a remaster, right? Mm-hmm. I think calling it a visual remake is not inaccurate either. Still running on the base code. It's running on the most up-to-date version of the engine. The animations are the same, but visually it looks like everything has been remade. I know we disagree on that. We'll get to that in a moment. But I am going to give you that, yeah, there are some animations that are still from the original. I didn't notice. I haven't taken issue with the animations. Like I thought it's fine. But you know, yes, there are still artifacts of its, you know, of its age from 2002. But you know, I still think that the game is pretty impressive. Now, you mentioned something that I want to kind of get to. Yeah. Well, there's a few different things actually. We're still just
get that deep. But,
oh man, I better hurry up then, because it's not supposed to be a long discussion.
Nope.
All right, so you mentioned Doom Eternal.
Yes.
Sound like you were saying Doom Eternal you think is more impressive than Prime Remastered.
Visually, yes.
I don't think I can agree with that. Yeah. Now I understand your point that the areas are larger. That I understand. And you know what? I will put footage side by side in this, right? Like, you know, I haven't taken a look at Doom Eternal recently. I do own the game though, so I actually got a 60 FPS capture card, so I might have 60 FPS gameplay. But actually, Prime Remastered, it doesn't. That's part of the issue with Doom Eternal. It does not run at 60 frames per second, and also has a dynamic resolution that's very blurry. Prime Remastered is clean, crisp, sharp the entire time, at a smooth 60 FPS the entire time. So
because Prime Remastered is much easier to run than Doom Eternal, hence why Doom Eternal is a more impressive looking game.
I don't think the overall effect is as impressive. And then, you know, guys in the comments, I want you to share your opinions below for sure, right? Because this is subjective. This is Well,
I've been
so
getting blasted since I made that statement on Twitter, so it's gonna happen.
yeah, but some people agree with you, right? Now, I
Let's go.
personally think that more people will agree that Prime Remastered looks better than Doom Eternal,
Yeah,
for the reasons I listed, right?
just the resolution alone.
Yeah.
Having that crisp 1080p the whole time. People are
Well,
gonna be like, that
it's
alone.
so technically, Metroid Prime Remastered is 900p docked
Okay.
and 612 handheld. But resolution isn't everything. Resolution is just a piece to the puzzle to the image quality. There's a lot of different things that go on. There's aliasing, that sometimes can make things look kind of fuzzy. There's different things. But I'll say that playing through Prime Remastered, I just feel like playing through it, I don't really notice any of those issues. Like constantly, even in handheld mode, the game just looks sharp and crisp. I don't experience this issue when I play other first-person shooters like Wolfenstein 2, like Doom Eternal, where it looks fuzzy. And unfortunately for me, like it's kind of why I don't really play too many like third-party multiplats on Switch. It's because most of the time, yeah, they may run and it may be kind of cool that they're there, but they just look fuzzy. And
Sure.
so for that reason, I can't even like hold them even in the conversation for one of the best looking Switch games. And when you factor in frame rate, I also think it makes a big difference. But I also think it goes beyond that for Prime Remastered. The lighting is superb. Like there's just so many crazy things going on with the lighting that I don't see on Switch. Like you'll go into a room, you'll have your arm cannon, and there may be like blue mushrooms, and then there'll be like some sort of fungi on the top side that are also yellow, and you'll see like blue lighting bounce off, yellow lighting bounce off. You don't see that in the original game. You don't really see that in Switch games in general, just how good the lighting is. The geometry I actually think is pretty impressive too. Like there's a lot going on there. It's very dense with different things going on. I see your face though. You seem to disagree. So you disagree on that, but my point is that the geometry, the lighting, the different effects, like when you're in Talon 4 and you just land and the rain is bouncing off of Samus's arm cannon. It's a new effect how it drizzles down, and depending on where you're aiming, it'll drip down in different directions, which is just, that's something new that looks really cool. They brought back the water ripple effects, and I think they look really good. It's really fun just to kind of shoot at the water, bounce in the water. I would argue the water effects are better than most games we've seen on Switch. Not saying it's like a crazy thing, but it's a nice little touch. Even the effects with the explosions, how you can now see, you were able to see the reflections in previous games. But a little subtle detail that we're noticing now is that when you're in a firefight and you kind of blast a space pirate with the missile, and there's other enemies in the area, her eyes will dart to the other enemy in the room in that brief glimpse where you saw her reflection on the visor. So there's a lot of really cool little visual effects. And overall, I think this game just has a lot going for it that makes it like a really pleasing visual experience. It's smooth, it's sharp, the environments are dense and rich with detail, lots of cool effects. There's not many games that can really say all that.
Well, there's not a lot of games that do what Metroid Prime is doing, and that is, one, only made for one system, and two, corridor. It's a corridor.
Sure. Yeah,
that's what it is. So
and I totally understand what you're saying there.
It's easier to do those visuals. That's why I went in with the expectation, like, oh, it should at least look this good. Because
by the way, I will tell you, I did expect the game to look significantly better, but seeing it in motion, it still wows me, right? Like I knew it was going to be effectively, arguably a remake for a lot of people. Like that conversation is happening, right? Now I do think it's a remaster simply because it's based off the code and stuff, right? Yep. But I did have that expectation, but it still has exceeded my expectation just with a lot of the cool effects and how it's all come together.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is difference of expectations, maybe just difference of I don't know, obviously your entire gaming experience and your gaming history and other things you might play besides Zelda. But it's interesting because like you're talking about all these little things that you're really impressed with, and I'm just like, well, those are pretty standard across the whole rest of the industry, just not Nintendo. So from Nintendo, I guess that's kind of neat. But like I'm more impressed with like how the physics work with the grass and the fire in Breath of the Wild than I was anything in this remaster. And granted, it's a brand new game, so it's not even technically a fair comparison, but it's like showing the different levels of
Random
what
thing you
impresses
can do
us.
though, you can blast space pirates, and this is the same. So it was implied with the original game. You can blast space pirates, and sometimes they'll get caught on like hooks or trees or something, and they're just stuck there for like a minute, which is kind of gruesome but fun. At the end of the day, it is an old game, but visually, I still think it looks a lot better than most games. But
I think it looks good.
But you know, again, there are games you think look better. So, can you list for me 5 games that you think look better?
I just did this list of 8. Someone asked me earlier.
Yeah, I saw that, and I disagree. But I want you to list them.
Sure, you heavily disagree. One game I want to bring up because I think it's maybe the most potentially comparable is Alien Isolation.
I agree. That is a good comparison. Now, I don't own that game, so you know, grain of salt, right? But I have looked at footage. I've watched Digital Foundry on it, and I think it's a great deal. I probably should pick it up. I mean, it's Metroid is based off Alien, right? It's actually
a really good game too. On top.
Yeah, and it's only $20, and apparently the Switch version's like one of those miracle ports.
Yeah, they nailed the Switch.
Yeah, but still, Prime Remastered, better frame rate.
Sure.
60 frames per second versus 30. That's a significant difference. That should not be understated.
But here's the thing. I don't ever consider frame rate, like difference between like 30 and 60. I don't ever consider frame rate to be a visual thing. That's a gameplay thing. As long as the frame rate doesn't stutter, that affects your visual. That's why the whole Ridley thing messed with my mind for a moment because it looked like he stuttered, and I was like, "Why? Wait a second. This was all silky smooth, and then that happened. Why?" That's why it caught me so off guard. And that's why I thought like, "Oh, did they mess up?" And then I'm like, "Oh no, that's just what the animation was in the original, and it was 60 FPS, so we didn't really care." But that was one of the things where I'm like, you know, it'd be like me looking at Breath of the Wild, right? It's got its frame rate issues even still to this day. And I don't think it affects the visual quality of the game. So, like, if I don't think that affects the visual quality, then why would I think 60 FPS does? It affects my accuracy, the smoothness of the gameplay. But that's gameplay. I'm not talking game. I'm talking about visuals.
I disagree, and let me explain why. Okay, so with a higher frame rate, the experience will feel more smooth, more fluid. Okay, and
gameplay.
When I try to explain higher frame rate to people, like 30 versus 60, I feel like to the very casual person who doesn't really understand the difference. When you're looking at 60 versus 30, it almost looks like it looks more real. I mean, you're literally seeing twice as many frames per second. Literally, there is more imagery there. It is a smoother experience that you are seeing. So I absolutely believe it is a visual thing because you are seeing more fluid gameplay. It flows better. It looks more real to you, more natural.
Do you think if Metroid Prime Remaster was running at 30 FPS,
I'd be very upset.
Okay, but listen, you walk into a room and you stop and you don't move your character. That the 60 FPS would actually make a difference in how that scene is.
It would, because it's not just static. Like, you'll walk into a room, you'll see dust particles floating through the light shafts. You may see some flowers or leaves bouncing. There may be some enemies moving around.
Oh no, there'll be things
You'll see
moving.
the clouds and the birds flying in the background, so it does impact it. It's a subtle difference, but it is still a difference. And I still think that 60 frames per second does look better. It looks more natural, more fluid, and it does make a difference visually. But you know, we can go back and forth on it, right?
Yeah,
that's my stance.
Debate,
that's your stance, right? People in the comments can decide if frame rate makes a difference or not. But one thing I think you will agree with, though, is that regardless, being at 60 frames per second, showing everything it does, is more technically impressive. It is a technical achievement to do 60 versus 30. It's more impressive, literally.
No.
Are you saying 60 is as easy to do as 30?
For a game exclusive to a platform, absolutely.
Well, most Switch games don't run at 60, even Nintendo games.
Yeah, because they're more ambitious.
What I'm saying is, a game running at 60, that requires effort.
I would expect a GameCube game to run at 60 FPS on Switch. I don't think it requires the effort.
Sure.
You think it.
Well, the problem is that visually, I think the game has also been remade, and that's something else where we dispute it a little bit. You think that there are still artifacts from the previous game visually, code-wise, animation-wise. Factually, that is the case. Like, there's no debate there. We agree on that. But we're
No, I
talking
think,
about just what we're
yeah,
seeing
yeah.
visually.
I think the when the visual thing, what made me really realize it, because I think the game looks good, but I'm like, it just kind of looks like what you remember. Obviously, people always remember games from the past looking better than they really did. So that's actually been a comment to me. It's actually kind of nice that it looks like what I thought it looked like, but it didn't.
Yeah,
But I watched gosh, it was like a 2-hour comparison video. I just had it on in the
sure.
background, and every time I looked up, there'd be certain moments where I'm like, that there and that there look identical, just in a higher resolution. Did they really replace all the textures in here, or did they just do smart replacing of certain textures and obviously the character models?
So I'll tell you this, right? Because I saw you make that comment earlier. I literally went through the beginning of Prime Original and Prime Remastered, and I looked for things that looked identical. They intentionally designed the remaster to look like the original, but it is all literally new from everything I saw. I watched Digital Foundry's video on it too.
Sure.
They showed comparisons. Like when you're in the space frigate and you see the monitors, the monitor count will still be the same, but they are new monitors at different angles. Every, like, the hallways, everything is different. Because up close, a lot of games, especially Switch games, when you look at textures up close, they do get a little blurry. And I'll say that even with Prime Remastered, looking at the floor, looking at the walls right in front as close as you can get, they're not extremely sharp. But no game on Switch is.
No.
But I thought when I was playing my original playthrough, when I did that I did wonder, are those parts maybe from the original, and that they just, they only kind of upscaled them. But I went through and I checked, and no, they are different. They just probably didn't put as much of a resolution there to, balance things out in terms for performance and all. Like in the beginning areas of Talon 4, when you're in the raining area when you land, like they add mud textures, there's a lot of foliage. The original is just like a whole bunch of random green splotches and brown splotches. Like it's totally redone. Like everything I've seen, and I've looked at comparisons to multiple playthroughs side by sides, it's all totally redone. And this is not just my opinion as well. There are others out there who have done graphics comparisons, who have looked at them side by side. They say it is redone. So when you say it isn't, you're entitled to your opinion.
I'm saying when I
but
say
other people disagree.
Isn't, yeah, when I say it isn't, I'm not saying it from a factual standpoint. In fact, the only people that can say that are the people that worked on the game. But what I will say is that the fact that I can look at that and I go, that kind of feels like something that I saw in the prior game, from an unimpressive visual standpoint of memory, and even looking side by side, you're like, oh, okay, maybe. Well, okay, I shouldn't even be looking at this and thinking it looks like something from game.
Well, see, what's interesting though is that the way the game is made, they have new artwork for the areas for this remaster. Like they went at it from basically redesigning, but they redesigned it to look like the original. But there's a lot of new stuff, right? Like you'll see like flowers that weren't there before and are there now, or vice versa, more tree branches. One of the beginning areas for Talon 4, you'll see like water, there's like water, kind of like little small pieces of water flowing through. There'll just be like one stream in the original, but there'll be like 3 in the new one. But you remember it as the same thing, but it's little things like that. But I'll even say there are some details that aren't in Remaster that were in the original, and they just went at it from a different angle. Like where the cracks are and where the bricks are laid out, it's actually a different layout in Remaster, but it's kind of like really subtle details that look about the same when you're not comparing them side by side.
So I think for me, the biggest thing is just because like you brought up those streams, I remember, and there's some specific things I remember. Some of the flames, because I'm like, oh, some of the flames look really cool, but then it's interesting because all of this stuff is kind of, well, by the way, all of this stuff's amazing, and they use trickery and wizardry, and it adds to the atmosphere of the game and all that stuff, the believability of the world. But I guess why it doesn't impress me as, I guess maybe as much as I mentioned that silly, stupid thing, lighting grass on fire and watching it interact and watching the wind blow. It is like, as I'm playing, none of this stuff you can really interact with. It's all just pre-canned animated fire. It's copy paste, or here's a stream, let's throw 2 more in and people will think it looks better. It does look better, but you also can't do anything to it. It's just a pre-canned thing that's actually one of the reasons why you probably think it looks so good, because it's a corridor game and they can do this kind of stuff. It doesn't matter that like in the very beginning you walk in, you have those flames, and you can walk right up to one and touch it and nothing happens. Not that I expect something to happen to the character, but nothing happens to the flame or the animation. It doesn't change. And that's something that as time has gone on with Nintendo games, so many things are affected by what you do that just don't matter. Even in like Luigi's Mansion 3, completely different art style. Obviously personal preferences come in, but there's just things you'll do in there that all of a sudden the flame on a torch is affected because you sucked a vacuum on a completely different direction. And it wasn't even about that. Maybe you can't knock the flame out, but it will react to a player thing. And in this game, none of the stuff's really reacting. The stuff that's reacting is the enemies and the things that are meant to be shootable.
Well, I'll say that it's kind of one of the reasons why I think the water effects in the beginning are really cool, because there is a lot of interactivity there. You can shoot the water. It drizzles down your arm kind of different directions, which is really cool.
I really like the water on the ground.
But it is the case, right? Like if you find like some leaves and you shoot them, nothing happens. Like that is true, right? So there is a certain level of interaction that isn't there that you might sort of see in some Nintendo games more often. For sure, Breath of the Wild, right? So I get you there. That's definitely something that should be noted, right? Absolutely, So I think it's a valid point. I still don't think it makes
in Metroid Prime 4. I expect all that stuff to be affected.
Sure, and those are ways that they can kind of improve upon what was established with Remastered. That said, and that's a great point for maybe Luigi's Mansion 3 being a better looking game overall than Prime Remastered, because while the environments are also very small, I would argue even smaller than Prime Remastered, but there's so much going on in those environments. There's so much detail. There's so much you can interact with. It's extremely impressive. And I would put Luigi's Mansion 3 in the top 5 most impressive Switch games. Like, I would.
I think almost anyone.
Yeah, but also, there are things in Prime Remastered I would say look more impressive than Luigi's Mansion. Not across the board, but certain elements. And that's also why I think it deserves to be... it's in part, it deserves to be in that conversation, right? There's a lot of geometry in those environments. They were totally reworked. It's new models altogether. The lighting in Prime Remastered... I can't think of many Switch games that are that impressive. And going back to the Alien game, again, with a grain of salt, right? Because I haven't played it myself. And it is an impressive port. Extremely impressive. And it's a very good comp. But I'll tell you that the amount of geometry, the density of what you're exploring is very simple by comparison. Sure. There may be some really cool visual effects that are very advanced that we don't see in Prime Remastered in Alien, so one may not be better than the other. It's kind of subjective depending on what you're sort of looking for.
What you want out of your vision.
Yeah, but also, again, Prime Remastered, it's a locked frame rate at 60, locked resolution. Those things I think also do matter. Now, I did ask if there were any other games that you think look better. I know on Twitter you brought up things like Pokemon Snap, Monster Hunter, and I'll tell you, Pokemon Snap, Monster Hunter, when I think of some of the best looking games on Switch, I think those are in the conversation. Absolutely.
When people ask me for games, I think there's a lot of agreement on what some of the best looking games.
But I also tell you, I would say Prime Remastered definitely looks better than Pokemon Snap, and let me explain why. Because there is more going on in terms of there's a certain level of interactivity to your point that you can do, but it is also an on-rails thing, that there's limitation there. Also, up close, the textures are blurrier than in Prime Remastered. They're not as sharp, not as clean, not as... I think the game is running at 60 frames per second. I was trying to confirm that.
I think it is.
Yeah.
It's hard to know because I don't know if it's a game that needs it, but then it feels pretty smooth when you're shooting your camera side.
Yeah. So, there's always you can make on both ends, but I personally would say Prime Remastered is a little bit above that one. Monster Hunter Rise is an interesting one because the games are less comparable, right? Because Pokemon Snap is on rails. It's almost like a shooter because you're taking pictures, right? So it's a little bit more comparable to Metroid Prime than Monster. Monster Hunter is a third-person sort of sandbox game, right? Like, as you play in relatively open environments, not open world, but large open areas.
Open sections.
Sections. And I'll say that, while the areas are larger and there's some really cool advanced techniques going on, like I do think Monster Hunter is one of the most impressive games on Switch. But, you know, when you look up close to things, I don't think the texture quality holds up really well. Well, it depends. Like, I'm talking about, like...
Some things.
Yeah.
That's a game that's a little wishy-washy. Like,
Yeah.
some of the back environments won't be that impressive, but
The
then
geometry of the mountains and stuff, they're very jaggy.
Yeah.
You can see the polygons like that.
But then when you're in
bad.
combat with, you know, a massive monster and all of these crazy effects and crazy stuff going on, it's like, oh, this actually looks pretty good.
It's very good, and that's something where, you know, it is subjective.
That feels more impossible to me than this game.
It's in the conversation. It's definitely in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you made it clear that you think obviously the Metroid Prime's more impressive, and behind the scenes, you made reference that you think it might even be the most impressive. I know you're not making that argument in this.
Well, it's tough because it's subjective, right? Like,
it is totally subjective.
You know, there are little different things to look at. Like, you can make the argument for Breath of the Wild, even though that game was made for Wii U, came out back in 2017. Like, Breath of the Wild is still arguably the most impressive game on Switch because it's a massive open world that does it better than most games.
Yeah, the only thing that keeps it in my back of my mind from not being impressive, even though I love it, it's my favorite game of all time, it was made for Wii U. So I'm like, well, then I guess I shouldn't be surprised on Switch since it was made for hardware worse.
Yeah.
That actually makes me wonder what could be done with an open world game on Switch made for it. Well, we're about to find out.
We are about to find out.
We are about to find out.
Yeah. Now, Prime Remastered, like, surface level, like, if you just look at, like, the same amount of space, like, if you were to look at, you know, per inch, Prime Remastered looks better, but there's a lot more inches in Breath of the Wild, right? So that has to be taken into account, and the physics should be taken into account, too.
Yeah.
But Prime Remastered, per inch, has more density with the geometry, there's more detail, higher frame rate, but again, they're totally two different styles of game.
Yeah.
So it kind of comes down to, what do you think is more impressive for yourself, right? So there's definitely arguments to be made here, you know. But I do think that it's all. I mean, Nate, like you're stating your opinion here, and I mean you and I both know that your opinion is not as popular, right? So you know, don't attack him because he's
gonna lose subscribers over this one.
He is challenging the norm, right? And I think that actually should be respected, right? Like, just because everyone else is saying it doesn't mean that you should just agree, right? You're stating your opinion. You think it's a good-looking game. You just don't think it deserves to be called one of the best-looking Switch games. I do. It impresses me so much that I am surprised that they were able to get this in the way it is on Switch.
The word that gets me, and I haven't heard it just from you, I've heard it from probably a dozen people. I know it's not that much in comparison to how many people playing games. But in my circle, this feels like an impossible Switch port or a Switch game. This feels like one of those impossible technical achievements. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, I don't like how? We've had games that were way technically more challenging to try to get to run on Switch than this. And that's my opinion, of course, because I know that this is an old game. I know that it's very small environments, and I know that because it's so small, it's a lot easier to maybe make it look better because there's not as much going on. There's not as much crazy physics things happening. Like, I know you mentioned enemies getting stuck briefly in a tree. I mean, that's cool.
Yeah.
But like, there's like so much more interactivity in other games that they have to consider that add to the visual pleasure of playing the game. You know?
Sure.
What I mean?
Sure, the experience, right? I mean, the same way how you'll argue
it's hard
that,
to
like,
separate gameplay from
how the interaction can impact your visual experience. So does the frame rate, right? Like, there's different angles to it. So, you know, I still will contend that, to me, when I played the game the first time, I did get that feeling. That's like, wow, they got this to run on Switch, and this looks so much more impressive than so many Switch games. But to your point, a lot of that does have to do with these smaller areas, the closed corridors, which, you know,
it's expectations. Like, I expected this.
Yeah, but again, you could, while that may be the case, the overall, like, impression that a lot of people have is that it looks amazing, and in part because of that. So the overall impact it's having is more significant than other games that may have more ambition with, like, the scope and the physics and all. But I still feel that, like, you know, if it comes down to recommending, like, a visual experience that's going to impress someone, Prime Remastered is absolutely in my top 5. You did mention that you feel like Prime Remastered maybe could be in the top 10, which honestly, that's really not that far from top 5 because there's a lot of games like,
I said it looks good.
like
it just isn't something that like blew my mind playing. I'm like, yeah, this looks good. What I would
blew my
expect
mind.
Metroid Prime to look like on the Switch.
Yeah.
I think people underestimate how good games can look on
So
Switch.
there is something that I've heard, and we'll kind of close out after this. But I've heard some people say that it looks like, you know, basically like the original, just with some reworkings, like a new coat of. I don't think a new coat of paint is a proper descriptor because it's literally new geometry.
Yeah.
New
I think
lighting.
Some people like, have tainted a bit because we've seen this game in emulators and stuff with texture packs, and mods and stuff for so long.
All of the environments have been completely redone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, is it possible there might be like 1 or 2% of the game is like just upscaled? It's possible.
Maybe.
But the overall impact is a visual remake. It's a remaster in terms of code and animation, but visually it is a remake.
Sure. I guess if you wanna
common ground. Common ground.
Strip, you know, 2/3 of the game out and call it a remake. That's cool.
I mean, I'm not calling it a remake. I'm saying it's a visual remake.
Perspective. From a visual.
Yeah. Right. It is a remaster. Yeah.
And then we both agree it's a really damn good game and everyone should play it. And at $40, what a value! What a value!
Yeah. But also Alien being 20, that's also an incredible value too.
And it is. And yes, it does technically look better on other platforms, like any third-party game.
Although they did say that like the Alien port, like in some ways, looks better on Switch. In some ways, not across the board, but in some ways.
It sounds like when it was in development, they were almost considering Switch as like a primary platform. So that's what it sounds like based on what I've heard. But who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? But that's one reason why it looks so good, I guess. Obviously, it's got simpler environments, but then it's got other things that are more complex. That's just the way it goes. Personal preferences, everyone. We can all get along.
Yeah. Art is subjective. So,
very.
You know. That said, Nate, where can we find you? Where can people take their pitchforks and torches?
So they can go to AndresRestart. Go ahead and hit the dislike. No,
but if you have hugs and likes, you can go to Nintendo Prime, and it'll be linked in the description below. Seriously.
Absolutely.
We all have different opinions.
Check out our podcast every Wednesday because I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about Metroid Prime.
It will not. No. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see y'all really soon. Take care. Bye.